The Legend of Zelda is one of the most beloved video game series ever, and I recently decided to play all the 3D games in it. However, I will be starting in chronological order, which means I will begin with Skyward Sword. Now, before we begin this adventure, I should first state what I'm looking for in a Zelda game. That is story, gameplay, and dungeons. Now, I'm going to involve characters and story, and the world in gameplay. Now, without further ado, the story of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword stars the characters Zelda, Groose, Fi, an old lady, Girahim, Impa, and Link, or as I named him, Mars for some reason. There are also a bunch of other characters, but they don't have as much story relevance, so we won't be talking about them. The story begins with Mars having a bad dream about a giant monster, and then receiving a letter.
Bird woke you up, right, loser? Today is the day where you ride your Loftwing in a race so you can become a knight. Well, meet me at the goddess statue as soon as you can.
After receiving your letter from Zelda, you head out, save a cat, and then you're off to actually meet Zelda.
Hi, Mars. You know, my bird got here a while ago. You did not waste time, right?
So after your near-death experience, you meet the best character in the game.
Sup, loser? Looking for your dumb, stupid, idiotic bird? Man, I wonder what happened to that pest. I bet it flew into some rocks, hit its head, and fell below the clouds, never being seen again. That would just be so unfortunate. For you, I mean. Then Zelda would finally lose interest in you and look for a strong man like me.
Groose, I'm right here.
Gah!
Eventually, Mars saves his bird and wins the race. After that, Zelda asks him on a date, which is unfortunately interrupted by a tornado. After Zelda falls below the clouds, Mars finds the goddess sword and its guardian Fi.
I calculate a 65% chance that you will find me annoying.
In the morning, Mars gets his iconic green tunic, and now the adventure truly begins. Mars goes below the clouds and finds an old lady who instructs him to go into Faron Woods. Here, Mars meets the Kikwi, who instructs him to find others of their kind, and then he can enter the first dungeon, where he meets Girahim. After this encounter, Mars heads to the Elden Volcano, where these two have managed to break up the key to the temple, so now Mars has to be the one to collect it, just so he can enter the second temple of the game. Then, Mars can enter the Lanayru Desert, where he must activate these 3 generators in order to access the third temple. Then he heads back to Faron Woods, then Lanayru Desert, then back to Elden Volcano. Each place ends up being more of a scavenger hunt, which makes it hard to really care about the characters or places I'm visiting, and makes the plot feel mostly like filler. But the game does have good relationships, especially that between Zelda and Mars. It is hard with a silent protagonist to give them a reason to go on the adventure without upsetting the player. But this game makes it so that the reason Mars is going on this adventure is to help save Zelda. And it helps that they are friends from the start. However, a character I do not like is Fi.
Master Mars, I calculate that this door has an 80% chance of opening if you use this oddly shaped key that clearly fits in the door.
Fi tells you so many obvious things, and then puts a percent next to it that is almost always a multiple of 5. Now, I'd like to end this story section on a high note, so let's go back to talking about my favorite character, Groose, again. I think he's my favorite character because he has the most significant character arc, and can be quite funny at times.
This place needs a name, fitting for this rugged, adventurous wilderness. From now on, we'll call it Groose Land.
Take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt because I played on the Wii version of the game and not the Switch version, which is important because I believe that the Switch version might be superior because of motion controls. On the Switch, you have the option to do motion controls or not. And on the Wii, you are left with only motion controls. Now, I'm not against motion controls necessarily, however, with the Wii, I don't think they're implemented correctly, and it causes a lot of problems with this game. I've had problems where the Wii Motion Plus comes loose, so I bought a whole controller with the Wii Motion Plus built in, and even then, I've had like 8 connection errors in this playthrough. I think the real problem is that motion controls are used for almost everything in this game. And to give you a few examples, they are used in combat, to put a key in a door for some reason, that's done in every dungeon, to fly around the hub world, though that's actually some of the best motion controls in the game to me, and for puzzles throughout some of the dungeons and outside, like moving these eyes around by moving your sword until they fall off. However, where do you find these dungeons and how do you get to them? Well, that comes to our next part. The world of Skyward Sword is split into 4 sections. You have Skyloft, Lanayru Desert, Faron Woods, and the Elden Volcano. While the latter 3 are used for finding dungeons and continuing the story, Skyloft is used for side questing and as a hub world, which is a problem because every side quest is there and they're mostly late game. And what good is increasing life when you've already beat every dungeon? The dungeons in Skyward Sword are really well designed. Every one has its own unique puzzle as well. The first dungeon in Skyward Sword involves moving this eye around until it falls off using motion controls. The second dungeon uses a very different thing, having no motion controls at all to move this ball around and balancing on it. Now, despite not using motion controls, I think this dungeon is probably the weakest in my opinion. Mostly because the next 3 that follow, though, are really well made. The third dungeon uses these time shift stones to move all of these rooms back in time. The fourth dungeon has some really interesting symbolism and a really cool puzzle if it wasn't ruined by Fee telling you the answer. However, the 5th dungeon is probably my favorite in the game. It once again uses these time shift stones, but instead of just moving one room back in time, it pushes the entire dungeon back in time, making for some interesting puzzles below deck. 6th temple has some unique fights against new enemies, and the final temple has rooms dedicated to all the previous temples. Now, there's no game complete without boss fights. However, I'm only going to talk about my favorite one, the ancient automaton Kaloktos. Kaloktos appears at the end of the Ancient Cistern, which is the 4th dungeon in the game. It is a really well-made boss fight, and you even get to use the dungeon item to pull off its limbs one by one. Skyward Sword's biggest strength is its dungeons, because they are the only thing that lacks repetition that goes throughout the whole game. The game actually has few flaws, but those flaws appear so often that it sours the whole game. If you are a Zelda fan, this game is worth playing at least once. If you haven't played a Zelda game, then I don't think this is the best place to start, even if I did. That is right. This was my first Zelda game. I didn't like the game back then, and I find it funny that now the Zelda series is one of my favorite game series. Well, until my next review, I've been Hasbo, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.